It was a freezing winter evening in New York. The streets were lined with holiday lights, and well-dressed people walked briskly past high-end shops, their breath visible in the cold air. Amidst the crowd, a man in his late 30s walked alone. His jeans were faded, his jacket slightly worn, and his shoes looked like they had seen better days. His name was David Carter. Most people ignored him, assuming he was just another struggling man in the city. But what they didn't know was, David was a multimillionaire. Tonight, he was testing something. Would people treat him differently based on how he looked? With a calm smile, he approached a luxury restaurant, La Maison Royale, one of the most expensive spots in town. And he owned it. Bell chimes as the restaurant door opens. A warm, elegant ambience fills the air. Soft classical music plays in the background. David stepped inside, taking in the gold-trimmed decor, crystal chandeliers, and waiters dressed in black and white uniforms ***. The smell of freshly baked bread and sizzling steak filled the air. He walked up to the podium where the hostess, Sophia, stood. She was young, blonde, and dressed in a sleek black dress. Her eyes flickered over him, and immediately her lips curled in disgust. Sophia, with her fake polite tone. Sir, can I help you?" David calmly. "I'd like a table for one, please." Sophia hesitated. She glanced at his old jacket and slightly scuffed shoes. "Sophia," whispering to coworker, but loud enough to be heard. "Is this guy serious? He looks like he just walked out of a thrift store." The coworker stifled a laugh. David heard every word, but instead of reacting, he smiled softly. David asked gently, "Is there a problem?" Sophia sighed dramatically and grabbed a menu. Sophia, "Fine, but just so you know, our meals start at $100. Are you sure you can afford it?" David kept his expression neutral. David replied, "I'll manage." With an eye roll, Sophia led him to the worst table one near the kitchen doors, where the sound of pots clattering drowned out the music. She tossed the menu onto the table carelessly. Sophia said, "Your server will be with you eventually." Then, without another word, she walked off, laughing with another hostess. David simply smiled. Time passes. Murmurs of guests, clinking glasses, soft jazz playing. David waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Other guests wearing designer suits and expensive jewelry were greeted warmly, served drinks immediately, and given the best seats. But David? He was ignored. He politely raised his hand to call a waiter. The man sighed and walked over slowly. Waiter, bored tone. "What do you want?" David remained calm. "I'd like the filet mignon, medium rare, and a glass of your finest red wine." The waiter snorted. "That's $250. You sure?" David's smile didn't waver. "Yes." The waiter shrugged and walked off without a word. David noticed how different the staff treated wealthy-looking guests, smiling, laughing, making conversation. But when they saw someone who didn't look rich, they acted like he didn't belong. After another long wait, David's food finally arrived. But the steak was overcooked and dry. He politely raised a hand for the manager. Mr. Reynolds, annoyed. "Sir, if you're going to complain about the price, maybe you should have gone somewhere cheaper." Sophia smirked from the front desk. Sophia, laughing, "What did you expect? This place is for VIPs, not." Gestures at him mockingly, "People like you." A few guests at nearby tables chuckled. David simply nodded. Then he pulled out his phone. Phone dialing, a deep male voice answers. "Hey Alex, come to the restaurant. Now." A few minutes later, the restaurant doors swung open. A well-dressed man in a custom-made suit rushed inside. Alex, out of breath. "Mr. Carter, I had no idea you were coming tonight." The entire restaurant fell silent. Sophia's face turned pale. The waiter froze in place. The manager's jaw dropped. Mr. Reynolds stammering. "Wait, Mr. Carter? As in the owner of this restaurant." David slowly stood up. His voice was no longer soft, it was firm, commanding. David reply, "Yes, and I came here to see how my customers are treated. I'm disappointed." After David revealed his identity, the restaurant fell into an awkward silence. Sophia stood frozen, her hands shaking as she clutched a menu. The waiters exchanged nervous glances, and Mr. Reynolds, the manager, looked like he had seen a ghost. Mr. Reynolds stammering, "Mr. Carter, this is all a misunderstanding." David turned his gaze to him, calm but authoritative. "A misunderstanding? Or a pattern?" Sophia lowered her head, her confidence completely shattered. The wealthy customers who had laughed earlier now looked guilty. Some whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable. Then, one elderly woman in pearls, sitting nearby, suddenly spoke. "You know, I almost walked out of here the first time I came. They treated me coldly too, because I was dressed modestly." She sighs, "I only stayed because I love the food. But now I see it wasn't just me." A few other guests nodded in agreement. David turned to Alex, his business partner. "I want a full review of the staff's conduct. Anyone who can't treat customers with basic respect doesn't belong here." Alex nodded sharply. Sophia's eyes widened with panic. Sophia, desperate, "Please, Mr. Carter. I made a mistake. I didn't know who you were." David's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "And if I really were poor, would that make it okay?" Sophia went silent, realizing she had no excuse. David sighed. "You're young. You have time to learn. But you need to change fast." He turned to Mr. Reynolds, the manager. "As for you, I trusted you to run this place, right? You failed." Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard. "I'll do better, sir." David's eyes narrowed. "No, you won't." A tense pause. "Pack your things. You're done here." Gasps filled the restaurant. Mr. Reynolds turned pale. He opened his mouth to argue, but then shut it. He knew he had no defense. Sophia looked at him, stunned. David turned back to her. "You have one chance. Prove you can change." Sophia nodded quickly, tears in her eyes. The next evening, David returned to the restaurant, this time in a sharp navy blue suit. He sat at the same table as before. A few waiters rushed to greet him, nervous but polite. Then Sophia approached. Her usual arrogance was gone. Instead, she looked humble, genuinely regretful. She placed a menu in front of him carefully, making eye contact. Sophia, softly, "Welcome back, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" David smiled slightly. "Water, please." She nodded respectfully and rushed off. No more smirking. No more rolling her eyes. As David looked around, he noticed a change in the restaurant. Waiters were smiling at all guests, not just the rich ones. A family in simple clothes was seated by the window, enjoying a meal without judgment. A man in work boots and a hoodie was politely offered a table. The toxic culture was gone. David leaned back, satisfied. The lesson had been learned. As David finished his meal, Sophia approached again. Sophia, quietly, "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you for giving me another chance." David looked at her carefully. "Don't thank me yet. Show me I made the right choice." She nodded firmly, determination in her eyes. As David stood up to leave, he glanced around one last time. His restaurant was finally what it was meant to be, a place where everyone was welcome. With a final satisfied smile, he walked out into the night. And from that day forward, this restaurant was never the same again,